Hello students! For your activity with me this week, we're going to be looking at cause and effect. Now, cause is why something happens, and effect is what actually happens. So just a quick example, let's say that my cup here was sitting on the table and I knocked it over. The effect would be that the water inside spills, and the cause, why that happened, was because I tipped it over. So that would just be a quick example of cause and effect. And then when you're identifying cause and effect in reading, there are sometimes signal words, not always, but some examples of those would be when, then, so, leads to, next, causes, and because. Again, those are not always there with cause and effect, but they can be a clue. The important thing is you want to look for why something happened and then what actually happened. Now, the reason we're having you do this is because in your reading, you'll come across cause and effect a lot, and knowing how to identify cause and effect helps you understand what you're reading. Okay, so first we're going to practice identifying cause and effect in just sentences. So let's go ahead and read this sentence. Daisy did extra chores around the house and earned enough money to buy a purse. Okay, so remember, cause is why something happened, and the effect is what happened. Now, the cause usually comes first. So if we look at this sentence, what happens first in the sentence? Daisy did extra chores around the house. That would likely be our cause. That's what came first. And then the effect has to tell us what actually happened. So, and earned enough money to buy a purse. Okay, so why she earned enough money was because she did extra chores. And what happened because she did extra chores is she was able to buy a purse. So again, the cause is Daisy did extra chores. The effect is she had enough money to buy a purse. Okay, let's do another example, and you try to figure it out with me this time. So our sentence is, he forgot to water his plants, so they all dried up and died. So I'm going to give you a hint real quick with this one. If we look back at our signal words here, one of them is so. Now if we look at this sentence, it also has the word so. He forgot to water his plants, so they all dried up and died. Now remember, the cause usually comes first. It explains why something happened. So what do you think the cause in that is? What comes first? If you said he forgot to water his plants, I'd say you're right. Now the effect is what happened because of the cause. So what happened because he forgot to water his plants? They all dried up and died. That would be the effect. Hopefully you got that. So again, the cause is he forgot to water his plants. That's what comes first. And the effect is that they dried up and died. That's what happened because he forgot to water his plants. Okay, we're going to look at some examples now in paragraphs. So read the paragraph out loud with me or follow along in your head. When making a pizza, the crust is the most important part of making it taste right. To make a good pizza crust, you need to add the yeast correctly. You need to add the yeast to the dough and then let it sit in a warm place like an oven for at least 30 minutes. This makes the dough rise and become puffy. Okay, to identify the cause and effect in a paragraph, we need to look for two things that happen together. Sometimes they're in the same sentence, sometimes they're in different sentences. And we didn't have any of our signal phrases in this paragraph, so again, we have to look for the two things that happen together. So let's reread and see if we can find those. When making a pizza, the crust is the most important part of making it taste right. So that sentence did not give us anything that really happened, especially not two things that happen together. Just the introduction to the paragraph. To make a good pizza crust, you need to add the yeast correctly. So again, that sentence is not giving us two things that happen together. It's not even giving us one thing that really happens. It's just telling you what you need to do. Let's keep going. You need to add the yeast to the dough and then let it sit in a warm place like an oven for at least 30 minutes. So that's telling us, again, you need to add, or now that's telling us you need to add the yeast to the dough. So that could be one thing that happens, is add the yeast to the dough and let it sit in a warm place. Let's keep going. This makes the dough rise and become puffy. Okay, so that is another thing that happens after we put the yeast and the dough in a warm place. It makes the dough rise and become puffy. So we might have a cause and effect there. Let's check it to be sure. So you need to add the yeast to the dough and let it sit in a warm place like an oven for at least 30 minutes. That's the first thing that happens. Let it sit in a warm place. That could be our cause. So the second sentence, this makes the dough rise and become puffy. So that comes second. That could be our effect. What happens? So let's see. The cause is why something happens. We let the dough and the yeast sit in a warm place. And the effect is what happens. After you do that, it becomes more puffy and the dough rises. So our cause would be let the dough sit in a warm place, and the effect, or what happens because you did that, is the dough rises and becomes puffy. We're going to do one more paragraph, and I want you to try to figure out what the cause and effect is with me. And so let's go ahead and read the paragraph. Tornadoes can be amazing, but are also quite dangerous. They are able to produce winds that are 300 miles per hour. When wind speeds are that high, houses can be torn apart and pieces blown miles away. Luckily, tornadoes usually only happen in certain parts of the world. So, to find our cause and effect in that, remember, we need to figure out two things that happen together. The cause will come first, and it'll explain why something happens, and the effect will come second, and will explain what actually happened. So let's reread that to see if we can find two things that happen together. Tornadoes can be amazing, but are also quite dangerous. Think to yourself, are there two things in that sentence that really happen together, or just one thing that happens first? No, not really. Just the introduction to the paragraph. They are able to produce winds that are 300 miles per hour. So think to yourself, is that two things happening together, or just one thing that could be the cause? Possibly. It's talking about winds being blown. So let's keep going. When wind speeds are that high, houses can be torn apart and pieces blown miles away. So think to yourself, is that two things happening together? One leads to the other happening? Possibly. Let's keep reading just to be sure now. You don't want to jump to conclusions right away. Luckily, tornadoes usually only happen in certain parts of the world. Does that sentence give us two things that happen together? The last sentence, no, not really. So let's go back to that sentence where we thought maybe there's cause and effect. When wind speeds are that high, houses can be torn apart and pieces blown miles away. So think to yourself, what happens first in that sentence, and then what happens after it? So the first thing that happens is it says wind speeds, or when wind speeds are that high. So when the wind is blowing really fast. So that could explain why something happens. That could be our cause, and that comes first. Next, it says houses can be torn apart and pieces blown miles away. Is that what would happen because of the wind blowing really fast? If you said yes, you're right. That could be our effect. So let's check it one more time, see if it makes sense. When wind speeds are that high, or when the wind's blowing really fast. Does that explain why something happens? Does it come first? Yes. Houses can be torn apart and pieces blown miles away. Does that happen because the wind is blowing really fast and really hard? Yes, that would be our effect. So the cause, wind blowing really fast. The effect, or what happened because of that, is houses are torn apart. Okay, for the Google form that goes along with this, you are going to be identifying cause and effect in sentences, and you'll also identify it in paragraphs like we practiced. And to do this, I want you to use these sentence stems. The cause is blank, and the effect is blank. So for example, on our last one we did, the cause for that was wind blowing fast, and then the effect of the wind blowing fast was houses get destroyed. So again, make sure you use these sentence stems so we know what you're saying is the cause and what the effect is. And in the Google form, I'm also going to have you give me an effect based off of a cause. So for example, let's say that I give you the cause, it was raining. What could be an effect of that? You just come up with whatever would be a reasonable effect. So for example, it's raining is the cause. The effect would be people get wet. That could be it. You could come up with any other thing as long as it makes somewhat of a sense. Okay, I'll be on the Google Meet later today, so come on and ask me any questions if you have them.